Trees are found throughout the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. It says that in the Garden of Eden, there were two main trees, the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. It was eating of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that brought sin into the world. But Jesus wants us to have life, and in a way, the cross is actually a tree of life because it's made out of wood. It's shaped even similarly to a tree, and in that, Jesus turned his death into our resurrection life. Psalm 1:3 tells us that the person who meditates on the law of the Lord is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. Today, we're going to learn how to draw the structure of a tree, just focusing on the branches, which is foundational to understanding any tree and even how the leaves sit on top of it.
Hello, my name is Rachel, and I'm a professional artist and disciple of Jesus Christ. It's a beautiful day in early autumn, and I wanted to spend some time outside today in the golden sunshine. It's amazing. So today we're going to look at trees. Have you ever heard the expression to see the forest for the trees? Sometimes when we look at something that's really big and overwhelming, it's hard to break it down into small parts. And this can be true even when you're looking at a tree itself. It has all these branches, all of these tiny little stems and leaves. And that's a lot to make decisions about what to put on your page. So we're going to break it down into simple steps so that we can better understand this beautiful thing that God has made. This is a pear tree, and it's actually a pretty small pear tree, so I think it will be great to practice with.
For this exercise, all you really need is a piece of paper, either loose or in your sketchbook, a pencil, eraser, and a sharpener. I'm using just a number 2 pencil with an eraser on it for my outlines, and then I'm going to use a sketch and wash paint pencil, which actually can become more like watercolor afterwards for my shading. But if you have other kinds of shading pencils, that's totally okay. The first thing I'm going to do is mark off on my page and where I want the top, bottom, and sides of my tree to be on the page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look out at my tree and I want to estimate how wide it appears to be versus how tall. Now it's very important that it's how it appears from my seat and not actually measuring the tree about how wide or tall it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch out my arm completely straight and hold up my pencil and see from where I'm sitting how many pencils wide it is at its widest point. So I see 1, 2, almost 3, not quite. Then if I do the same thing from top to bottom, it's 1, 2, and a little more. What that does is just give me an estimation of the proportions. So I know that at the widest point, it is actually a little bit wider than it is tall. This might influence my choice of even how to orient my page. So if I want, I could actually hold my paper horizontally like this, or even use both sides of my page in order to draw. Although that might make it a little bit harder with the binding, but I'm up for a challenge today. I'm just going to do that. So if I look at the width of my sketchbook and I'm estimating that the ratio is approximately 2 to 3. So if I mark off half of the height of my sketchbook, that means I want it to be 3 times as wide as that. So if I then just take my finger, and I'm not even using a ruler here, this is just estimation in order to block out the proportions, and it's about the distance of my fingers, I can then mark off side, side, and guess what? That actually is very close to the proportions of my sketchbook. What that means is I'm going to mark off the top of my tree right around the top of my sketchbook, the bottom of my tree right around the bottom of my sketchbook, and then the widest points are going to be around side to side. So it's a little bit hard to see with the shadows, but I've made marks where I want those to be. Now what I want to do is draw a shape that starts to approximate the shape that I see of the top of the tree. So if I look at all the branches together, they do kind of look like a hat or a mushroom, sort of like a triangle, but a little bit more rounded. And if I take my pencil again, I can measure and check about how high up the branches start to form. So if I remember that my tree is a little more than 2 pencils tall, I can see that the branches are forming only about half a pencil up in height. So the part that encompasses just that stem of the tree is quite short compared to the height where the branches start. That means that on my page, I'm only going to have the stem starting around a quarter way up the page. And then the rest of it is all going to be branches. So I know that the widest part of my tree is actually around the point where the branches are the lowest. So I'm going to mark that out. And now I'm going to just approximate the shape that I see of those branches as a whole. It's a bit of a hat mushroom. I'm noting a little bit where the branches dip in. And then I'm going to show that there's a triangle that I can see forming from some key branches down below. So that's going to be the trunk of my tree right there. And then the rest is going to be all branches. And so now I'm going to start looking at each branch. Now I'm building out the structure of my tree. Just like I did at the beginning when I was measuring how high up the branches started, I'm continually looking back and forth at the tree in order to figure out what is the amount of space. How high is this branch compared to this other branch? Again, looking at the proportions from where I'm sitting because it might look different if I was looking at it from a different angle. I'm paying attention to how much space is in between the branches from side to side as well. Notice at this stage of the drawing, I'm drawing fairly lightly and I'm only using straight lines. I'm not drawing detailed curves that I'm not going to want to erase later, because really what this is about is figuring out the proportions and making a map of where everything is on my page that I can change and add detail to later. Once I've reached this stage in my drawing, I can actually even hold it up and say, okay, how much does this thing that I've drawn match the actual thing that I'm looking at? I'm going to look back and forth and see what differences and similarities I can find. As I'm making adjustments, I'm starting to show shading on the tree. This will help the tree to start to look more 3D, but it's also just showing that, it's not really a line. We don't see lines in nature, we see blocks. As I go though, there are going to be parts where I start to add more detail and additional branches that are coming off the main branches. Note that not all pencil sharpeners were created equal. Right here, there was a point where I realized the original pencil sharpener I brought out was not made for the Sketch and Wash pencil. At this point, I'm starting to add some branches that are even coming in front of the other branches, which is part of what makes trees so complex. I'm also using lines that are going in different directions in order to intensify the shading along the edges. Here, I realized that one of these branches was actually at the wrong angle, so I adjusted it, and then I actually had to adjust the entire branch that was coming off of it, which is part of why it's good to go light in the beginning so that you can erase things later. Then after I corrected that branch, I added some of the branches that were coming behind and in front that are smaller but still important to make the tree feel like a whole piece. I got to the branches at the top and my proportions were a little bit tight on the page, but I adjusted it in order to make it feel like a full and finished drawing on this page. At this stage, I'm adding some of the smaller branches that are coming off of things. I'm not going very heavy on these because these are not the star of the show, they're just supporting details. If I wanted to, I could also add leaves because these smaller branches are actually where you would find a lot of leaves growing off of, but I decided to focus on the structure for this drawing. Now, because I did my shading with a Sketch and Wash pencil, is the fun part where I actually can just take a paintbrush with some water and I'm going over the whole drawing and using the paintbrush to then liquefy my marks so that they appear smoother and I don't have that sketchy line. If you're using a regular shading pencil, you could use another shading tool such as a paper stump, which is a little rounded up piece of paper, in order to create the same effect. Now my structural drawing of the tree is complete. If I wanted to, I could add more details. I could draw in leaves, I could draw in the background, but I actually really like how leaving the page stark white reveals the shadow structure underneath. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more high quality content helping you grow as an artist and a disciple of Jesus Christ. Until next time.